Good day to you. This might be a quick video, it might be a long video, I have no idea. Basically, I'm too lazy to edit a video today, but I want to make a video. So I want to read something to you that I read recently, which kind of amazed me, because this text that you can see is from a book called The Shepherd of Hermas. This was written in like 150 AD, approximately 150 years after Christ, maybe 200 years. Either way, it's very, very old, and it basically sums up all of the spiritual bullshit that we have been exposed to on the internet these days in a very succinct manner. This chapter that you can see on here, Commandment 11, is basically about true and false prophets. My personal view is that there are so many false prophets on the internet dressed up as healers or as astrologers or as any other bullshit thing that you can think of. And this short text really sums up why we can ignore like 99% of it. And what I want to do is literally just read it and then talk about it as I go through it. This might be the worst video of all time, but I don't think so, because this information is just really powerful, and it's going to help you from being deceived by all kinds of spiritual bullshit that is just all over the place. I'm going to post a link to the PDF if you want to read the whole thing. It is a Christian text, but I'm not a Christian, and I've just found it to be super interesting, very penetrating. So I'm going to read this 11th commandment, true and false prophets, and we're just going to go through it basically. So actually, before I read it, what happens in this book, there's this guy called Hermas. He has like a vision of like this woman who shows him this tower, and this tower's been built, and this tower is like a metaphor for the different relationships that you can have with God or with the divine. And then after he has all these visions, this shepherd appears and gives him all of these proverbs and commandments about how to live a real good life. Ultimately, the short version of everything that the shepherd teaches him is that you can have a direct experience with the truth, a direct experience with reality, with wholeness, with divinity. This aligns with something that I have found in my own life. Really, we can just go straight to the source, and it's available to all of us, because the human condition is the human condition. We're all the same, and none of us can be human without connecting or surrendering to wholeness or truth or God, or whatever you want to call it. Most of us who are struggling and lapse into spiritual bullshittery and nonsense only lapse into it for one reason, and that reason is that we become double-minded. We've let doubt and fear creep into our experience of the truth, of life, and so we start creating all kinds of complicated scenarios and situations in our life where we go to something other than the source to get information that only the source can give us, the source being God or truth, or that direct connection that is available to all of us at all times. If we can clear all of the hamster wheel bullshit out of our heads and just get in the present moment, this little chapter about true and false prophets really just builds on that. So as I read this, just think about all of the crap that's on the internet and all of the people out there that are just trying to sell you something. They're trying to make you feel that you need to stay stuck in your feelings, and that they're going to pull out some tarot cards, or they're going to give you some kind of astrological report about why your feelings need to be stagnating and all this kind of stuff. And they dress it up in all this mumbo jumbo, but really they're just serving themselves, because actually they're empty, and they know that you ultimately are doubting yourself, you're driven by shame, you don't know what to do, and you need a source of trust. But for whatever reason, something is going on inside you that is stopping you from trusting the only thing that can be trusted, which is the truth. So there's a very high chance I'm going to ramble my way through this reading, i.e. I'm going to stop reading and just point things out. It's not really a long text, but let me get on to it, right? So Commandment 11, true and false prophets. He showed me people on a bench and another person seated on a chair. And he said to me, "Do you see these people seated on the bench?" "I see them, sir," I replied. "These," he said, "are faithful, but the one seated on the chair is a false prophet who destroys the mind of God's servants. That is, he destroys the mind of the double-minded, not believers. So again, it's coming down to this idea that if you're double-minded, i.e., your focus is not just on reality and truth, but it's on all of these things that can distract you from the path, then you're going to be preyed on by these spiritual bullshit artists. Double-mindedness is the only real problem, and it comes from shame. Shame causes us to become disconnected from the truth about ourselves, and then to end up projecting that shame out and looking for solutions to that problem in the world. But we'll never find them in the world because this core problem is the split within ourselves, and we can only solve that by remedying our relationship with ourselves and making sure it's a truthful one. So, the double-minded come to him as a fortune teller and ask him what will happen to them. And that false prophet, not having the power of a divine spirit in himself, answers them in accordance with their questions and their wicked desires and fills their souls just as they themselves wish. The word wicked is really interesting. Like, we think wicked means evil, and it does these days, obviously. Unless you've been ironic, you say, yeah, that's wicked, man. Like, something is good. But ultimately, the word wicked means that we become estranged from God, estranged from the truth. And so, in this particular part of this passage, with their questions and their wicked desires, those wicked desires are just desires that we've got because of that fundamental split, that disconnection from the truth in the first place. We desire whatever it is, and then we think that that is going to fill the void inside ourselves, and then we go to these spiritual bullshit artists, these fortune tellers, or whatever it happens to be, and we get them to basically validate that desire and make us think that it's going to come true. But that desire is actually just an extension of our disconnection from the truth. This is amazing to me because this was written like 2,000 years ago, pretty much, and we're still seeing the same stuff going on. There is something in the human condition where we just find it so hard to trust life, and so we go find bullshit to trust in instead, basically. But actually, if you want your life to work out, and you want to feel good, and you want to flow, instead of forcing things, then you just need to trust the truth. That's the only thing that can be trusted anyway. And fills their souls just as they themselves wish. For since he himself is empty, he gives empty answers to empty inquirers. For no matter what, he answers according to the emptiness of the one asking. But he does speak some true words. For the devil fills him with his own spirit to see if he will be able to break down any of the righteous. The devil, I think, can really just be seen as a metaphor for the ego in the extreme. All of the things that keep us fragmented and then keep whispering these hamster wheel bullshit beliefs that keep us stuck in the void that the ego makes us believe we live in. So those who are strong in the faith of the Lord, if you don't want to believe in God or anything like that, you can just say those who are trusting the truth, those who are seeking the truth, those who are living the truth, those who are strong in the faith of the Lord have clothed themselves with the truth. Do not associate with such spirits, but have nothing to do with them. But those who are double-minded and frequently change their minds, practice fortune-telling like the outsiders, and bring great sin upon themselves by their idolatries. Sin, in the original etymology of the words, really just means that you're missing the mark. It comes from archery. It's like you're aiming to hit the target, and you think that you're aiming for the right target, but you miss the mark. The mark being the truth, that's what you really want to hit in this context. But you're aiming at the wrong target because of that fundamental disconnection from yourself, which causes you to filter all of your desires and everything that you're doing through bullshit, basically. And so you aim at the wrong thing, miss the mark, even though you think it's actually going to save you. And these spiritual bullshit artists are basically feeding into that. They want you to be empty so that they can maintain their own emptiness. And it really just becomes a case of the blind leading the blind. That's why spiritual bullshittery is so dangerous. And the other thing that's important here, and what I just said, is we keep changing our minds. If you're really just focused on the truth, you don't need to change your mind because you're committed to it. You keep getting evidence that the truth is going to take you where you need to be. There's the most solid foundation on which to build. And you don't have to keep changing from one thing to another. But when we're double-minded in the way that this guy keeps saying, whoever wrote this book, then ultimately what happens is we just flip from one thing to another. This week, we think some toxic relationship is going to save us. So we fire the arrow at that. Next week, we think it's going to be some intoxicating addiction or whatever it is. So we fire the arrow at that. Next week, we think it's a fortune teller. The next week, we think it's whatever. And so we just go from one place to another because we're not just focused on the truth. It really is that simple. Like if you haven't watched my videos before, all you really need to do, I like to say, is uncover the truth and then live the truth. When you're doing that, you're just focused, you're single-minded or one-minded because you're aligned with your greatest understanding of wholeness, and you don't have to keep going from one place to another, confusing yourself, and then getting sucked in to this kind of spiritual bullshittery that has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, probably thousands of years. So anyway, yeah. So, but those who are double-minded and frequently change their minds practice fortune tellers like the outsiders and bring greater sin upon themselves by their idolatries. Idolatry really just means that you're putting your trust in something other than God. Like the first of the 10 Commandments is basically that. Don't believe in, I can't remember how it's phrased, but like, don't believe in anything other than me, basically. And if you do go against that and you put your trust in other things, that's an idol and it's going to lead to problems because it's just going to take you off the path of truth. So yeah, for the one who consults a false prophet on any matter is an idolater and lacks the truth and is senseless. That's a very powerful sentence. For the one who consults a false prophet on any matter is an idolater and lacks the truth and is senseless. If you put your faith or you seek answers or you consult another human being to answer questions that only the truth itself can answer for you because of your direct connection to it, then you're going to get lost. You're out of your senses if you do that. For no spirit given by God needs to be consulted. Instead, having the divine power, it speaks everything on its own initiative because it is from above, from the power of the divine spirit. This is a really powerful sentence and probably the most powerful sentence in this whole little passage that I'm reading. For no spirit given by God needs to be consulted. Instead, having the divine power, it speaks everything on its own initiative because it is from above, from the power of the divine spirit. Ultimately, this comes down to trying to control life. But we can control life. We can only really surrender to life when we've been real and truthful. When we're driven by shame because of this internal split that I keep talking about, and we're living in the void, we're constantly running away from that shame and trying to fill the void with all kinds of crazy things. Like I've said, we keep firing those arrows and missing the target. When we're in that situation, we end up trying to control life so that our shame is not triggered. And we see that that split is there, and we have to return back to the truth. I often say the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off and make you miserable. And that's why. Because the truth at first, if you've been away from it from a while, is going to show you that all of the illusions you've been identifying with to keep that shame, to keep the truth at bay, are masking your shame. And that shame is going to come surging in. And so when we're living like that, we try and control everything. And this is why people in this situation tend to really believe in all of the spiritual bullshittery. They send themselves out looking for anything that will reaffirm the beliefs that they created for themselves purely because they want to believe in something to keep hiding from themselves. And that is a form of control freakery. They're trying to control the shape of the world and how they relate to it so they can keep hiding from themselves. And they go look for evidence in places where these empty fortune tellers, etc., are just going to return the emptiness to them, normally so they can make money and this kind of thing. And actually, what this is saying, and what I totally agree with, is real divine revelation, if you want to call it that, real experiences of wholeness entering your life and showing you the way forward. It's not something that you can just ask for. It's not something that you can consult. You can't just pick up the phone and dial God or whatever and say, look, hey God, what's my next step? You have to be moving forward and you have to be trusting. And when you're doing that, you're living in alignment with your Dharma, basically, then the path is going to reveal itself because it is ready to reveal itself to you because you're ready to see it. Not because you're trying to hide from yourself. And so you're getting involved in all these cockamamie schemes, trying to see something that's not even there, i.e., false prophecy that just reaffirms your illusions that are keeping you from the actual divine revelation, or whatever you want to call it, tastes of wholeness, that are going to come your way when you are living in that real way. So yeah. Okay, yeah. So, but the spirit that is consulted and answers according to the desires of the people consulting, it is earthly and fickle and has no power and does not speak at all unless it is consulted. So how, sir, I said, will a person know which of them is a prophet and which is a false prophet? Here, he said, about both the prophets, and on the basis of what I am going to tell you, you can test the prophet and the false prophet. Determine the man who has the divine spirit in his life. In the first place, the one who has the divine spirit from above is gentle and quiet and humble and stays away from all evil and futile desires of this age and considers himself to be poorer than others and gives no answer to anyone when consulted. The key thing there is humility. Ultimately, we can say that somebody who has access to wholeness is going to be very real, and somebody who's just spreading false prophecy on the internet or anywhere else is ultimately going to be very unreal because they're empty, i.e. they're living in the void because they're shame-driven as well. When we're shame-driven, we're not humble. The key word in that passage I just read there is humble. You ultimately be humble if you're real, because the only way you can be real is by being humble, i.e. understanding the limits that you have in your life, not trying to be perfect, knowing that you're not perfect, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, not being omniscient or trying to be omnipotent, i.e. trying to control everything in the way that we're saying. You're just humble, which means that you accept yourself as a human being under the effects of other forces, higher forces, God, chaos, truth, whatever you want to call it. And if you can accept that, then you will be humble. Going against that and not accepting it causes you to either try and be more than human or to be less than human, both of which are responses to our shame and that inner split that I keep talking about, and are what causes to deny the truth and to deny reality because we don't want to accept it and be humbled by it. So basically what it's saying is a false prophet is somebody who is not humble, and they're basically spreading the message of a lack of humility to people who are fighting being humbled by life in the first place. That's ultimately what is going on here. The main reason we want to believe in spiritual bullshit is because we don't want to be humbled by life and realize that actually we can't always have everything our own way, that we may not be as perfect as we may think we need to be, and that ultimately it's about letting go of all of that stuff and flowing with life instead of forcing it. Again, about the false prophets, nor does he speak on his own. Actually, sorry, this is about the non-false prophets. Nor does he speak on his own, nor does the Holy Spirit speak when a person wants to speak, but when God wants him to speak. So then, when the person who has the divine spirit comes into an assembly of righteous people who have faith in a divine spirit, and intercession is made to God by the assembly of those people, then the angel of the prophetic spirit that is assigned to him fills the person, and being filled with the Holy Spirit, the man speaks to the multitude just as the Lord wills. In this way, then, the divine spirit will be obvious. Such, therefore, is the power of discernment with respect to the divine spirit of the Lord. Now here, he said, about the earthly and the worthless spirit, which has no power, but which is foolish, In the first place, that person who seems to have a spirit exalts himself and wants to have a seat of honor, and immediately is arrogant and shameless and talkative and well acquainted with many luxuries and with many other pleasures, and receives money for his prophesying, and if he does not receive money, he does not prophesy. One thing that you'll notice online with all the spiritual bullshittery is that they've taken a lot of spiritual concepts, but they've wrapped them up in materialism. So ultimately, they use spiritual language. They'll talk about Dharma, for example, or they'll talk about, whatever. They'll talk about various things that are traditionally spiritual things, Christ consciousness even, things like that. And they'll say that if you can align yourself with that, then all of your material needs are going to be met. You can tap into God, basically, the God waves, and then you can finally buy that Lamborghini, or you can finally buy that house. All of your desires, your immediate desires, are going to be met, and you can just click your fingers and get them if you're using the law of attraction or whatever. That ultimately is just selling people, again, what they want to hear, because most people who are shame-driven want to take themselves out of the natural law of cause and effect that's going to actually get them the results that they want. But these people will also try and put themselves on a like a pedestal, because ultimately they're all trying to be influencers, and there's all marketing stuff gets involved and things like this. And so again, even though this was written 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, this situation is probably way worse than ever now, because we've got the internet, and all of these false prophets can just turn up the volume, and the culture really has become more materialistic, I would say, because there's more material goods everywhere, and we're all comparing ourselves to each other on social media and stuff like that. And so actually now is probably the best time ever to be a false prophet. There's more people that want to believe in it, but there's more channels for getting that false prophecy out there. It's kind of amazing that we've basically learned nothing in all this time. So yeah, now, can a divine spirit receive money and still prophecy? It is impossible for a prophet of God to do this, but the spirit of such prophets who do so is earthly. Next, he never comes near an assembly of righteous people. Instead, he avoids them and associates with the double-minded and empty-headed, and prophesies to them in a corner and deceives them. Everything he says is in accordance with their own desires. Again, those desires are ultimately the ego projected out into the world, and characterized by his own empty manner. For he is answering those who are empty. Again, it's the blind leading the blind. Many of these false prophets, if you want to call them that, are engaging in this kind of behavior. First of all, because the things that they're sharing are things that they want to believe deep down, because they're shame-driven and they're trying to reinforce their own beliefs so they can keep avoiding their shame and keep that split within themselves split. But also, they're selling people that come to them what they want to hear as well. And it turns into this big echo chamber where everybody is just bullshitting everybody else, and they're all holding themselves back from the truth, and nobody is dissolving shame and growing and evolving, because they're all basically telling each other what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. That's the main difference. Divine revelation, or whatever you want to call it, the taste of wholeness, it comes into your life, and it is going to be a case of the truth will set you free. With all this false prophecy and bullshit, it's actually an echo chamber designed to keep the truth at bay, because nobody wants to hear it, because like I keep saying, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off and make you miserable. And when money and marketing gets involved, it just gets even worse. So yeah, there's the empty speaking to the empty, the blind leading the blind. For the empty vessel placed together with another empty vessel is not broken, but they match one another. But when he does come to an assembly full of righteous people who have a divine spirit, and intercession is made by them, that person is emptied, and the earthly spirit flees from him in fear. And that person is rendered speechless and completely shattered and unable to say anything. For if you store wine or oil in a storeroom and place an empty jar in among them, and then later you wish to clear out the storeroom, you will find that empty jar you placed there still empty. So it is with empty prophets. Whenever they encounter the spirits of the righteous, they are found to be just as though when they arrived. You have now descriptions of the life of both kinds of prophets. Therefore, test by actions and the life the person who claims to be spirit-inspired. This reminds me of the quote from Jesus. He says, you can ultimately judge a tree by the quality of its fruit. I can't remember how he said it exactly. By their fruit you shall know them, something like this. Ultimately, the actions that we take lead to the fruit that's in our lives, lead to the results that we get. I always say, if you put real in, you get real out. If you put unreal in, you get unreal out. And so a lot of these false prophets, when you see behind the scenes, their lives are just a mess. Like really. I used to work in mental health, for example, and there were so many people that worked in mental health. They were constantly dishing out advice to people and things like that. And then you go in the staff room and they're all miserable and they're just complaining about their relationships and their lives and their addictions and all these different things. But when they go out onto the shop floor, so to speak, of the mental health well-being place where I worked, everything would seem like, it was in order and they knew what they were doing and this kind of stuff. That's a kind of false prophecy. And it's the same with a lot of these false prophets on the internet. They're parroting all this stuff that people want to hear. But then if you actually get to know them, then everything is it's a mess because there's no solid foundation, because they're empty, like this guy keeps saying. And if you put empty in, you get empty out. The only way you can be full, or you can fill yourself, is to get that connection to the truth. And of course, for the record, my life is a total mess when I'm not making these YouTube videos and ranting about these kind of things. So don't listen to what I'm saying either. But yeah, so blah, 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 blah. Yes, put your trust in the Spirit that comes from God and has power. The Spirit is just the truth, our connection to the truth and the words of the truth and anything that points you in the direction of the truth, which is just wholeness, ultimately, right? Or you can say the whole thing like the hippies used to say, love is God is truth. Put your trust in the Spirit that comes from God and has power, but do not trust in any way the earthly and empty spirit, because it has no power, for it comes from the devil, ego. Listen to the parable I am about to tell you. Take a stone and throw it towards the sky. See if you can reach it. Or for another example, take a water pump and squirt it towards the sky. See if you can penetrate it. How, I asked, can these things be, sir? For both these things you said are impossible. You just said are impossible. Well then, he said, just as these things are impossible, so also are the earthly spirits powerless and weak. They're powerless and weak because they're going against the universal laws of truth, how things actually work. This is probably something for another video, although I do have a video on this YouTube channel about the natural laws, the universal laws that apply to all of us, cause and effect, things like that. All of these laws, the law of flux, everything is changing, the law of connection, we're all connected, etc., etc. All of those things, I don't know if that last one's in the video, but all of these laws, universal laws, you have to be aligned with them in order to be able to get the results that you want from life and to keep flowing and to allow the truth to enter your life and to give you more information about where you need to go next. And if you're trying to go against these natural laws, like in these examples he's given, then it's going to be fruitless. You're wasting your time. And you're wasting your time if you listen to these spiritual bullshit artists, because almost everything they say goes against the truth. Maybe there's like a little grain of truth, which is why some people get sucked in. But ultimately, it's the thing I said about by their fruit you shall know them. Like, if you follow that spiritual bullshit advice, you might feel good in the short term, but probably you're not going to get any results. And then that's how you know it's bullshit, basically. So anyway, well then, he said, just as these things are impossible, so also are the earthly spirits powerless and weak. Now consider the power that comes from above. A hailstone is a very small pellet, but when it falls on a man's head, what pain it causes. Or for another example, take a drop that falls on the ground from the roofing tiles and wears a hole in the rock. You see then that even the smallest thing from above falling on the earth have greater power. So also the divine spirit that comes from above is powerful. So put your trust in this spirit, but have nothing to do with the other one. Ultimately, whether you believe it comes from above or it just comes from beyond, there is an access that we all have to the truth, which I think is just wholeness. Connection to ourselves, connection to the world, and connection to life and the way that it works in accordance with those universal laws. When you can align yourself with that, which you can do at any time directly by yourself without needing these indirect attempts through false prophecy and bullshit to get answers that you can only get from your relationship with yourself and unblocking yourself to be able to communicate with that truth, then if you can do that, then you're ultimately going to avoid so many of the pitfalls and problems that people experience on the spiritual path. There's so much stuff out there that is ultimately just a case of the blind leading the blind, the empty leading the empty. But the only way you can fill yourself is with the truth. And this book, like I said, it was written 2,000 years ago. It sums up all of the spiritual bullshit that is still unfolding in the world today, that people are trying to manipulate people with, they're trying to sell things to people with, they're trying to make people believe things that they don't really need to believe if they want to live a healthy, real life. So I just want to read that to make people think. This is a really good book. It's only short, it's like 150 pages. I'll put a link to the PDF from where I downloaded it. I recommend reading it. It's really made me think. And yeah, that was the video. If anyone wants to talk to me, here's a link. It's been there the whole time. ollieanderson.co.uk/talk. We can help you figure out your own stuff, whatever that may be. Get on a path that you want to be on. Start listening to yourself, nobody else. Maybe that's ironic in a way. I appreciate the irony. But it's all about helping you to figure out your own voice, basically. Because the only person you need to listen to is you, so that you can listen to the truth and the wholeness when it does burst through the cracks of the ego and the world and all the bullshit that's out there. So yeah, I don't know how long this video has been. I kind of losing my voice, had too much coffee. Totally irrelevant. Peace to you. Hope it helps. Take care.